Husband threw his wife with a sick child out for a young mistress. What happened 5 years later? Hi everyone. Before we get into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel's reach has been dropping a bit, and one of the best ways you can support us is by subscribing. It's quick, free, and helps us keep bringing you new and interesting stories. Your support means the world to us, and together we can grow this channel. Thank you so much. Now let's get to today's story. I'm writing from a temporary account for obvious reasons, and I've changed some details to protect my anonymity. They say you never really know someone until you've been through hell with them. I thought I knew David. I thought 13 years of marriage meant something. I thought the vows we made in that little church in Vermont, with my mother crying happy tears in the front row, actually mattered. How naive I was. I'm telling you this story not for sympathy. God knows I've had enough of that. I'm telling it because someone needs to hear that rock bottom isn't the end. Sometimes it's just the foundation you build your real life on. But let me start at the beginning, when everything still made sense. David and I met in college, both accounting majors with dreams bigger than our bank accounts. He was the kind of guy who brought me coffee during late-night study sessions, who remembered that I liked extra foam and no sugar. When we graduated, he proposed with a ring he'd been saving for 8 months to buy. Nothing fancy, a simple solitaire from K Jewelers. But to me, it might as well have been the Hope Diamond. Our early years were good. Really good. We moved to Portland, Oregon, rented a tiny apartment above Mrs. Chen's bakery on Hawthorne. The smell of fresh bread would wake us up every morning, and David would joke that we were living in heaven. He landed a job at Morrison Associates, a mid-sized firm downtown. I worked at a smaller practice handling books for local businesses. We were building something together. When Emma was born, David cried harder than I did. I'll never forget watching this 6'2" man hold our 7-pound daughter like she was made of spun glass. He took 2 weeks off work, unpaid, just to help me recover and learn how to be parents together. Those first months were exhausting, but we were a team. Look at her tiny fingers, he'd whisper during those 3 a.m. feedings. She's going to be a pianist, or maybe a surgeon. If only he could see her fingers now, long and graceful at 8 years old, finally healthy enough to take the piano lessons he dreamed about. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Emma was 18 months old when we first noticed something was wrong. She'd been walking since she was 10 months early, the pediatrician said. Nothing to worry about. But then she started falling more than other toddlers. Not the normal bumps and tumbles of learning to walk, but genuine collapses, like her legs just gave out. Dr. Martinez at Kaiser Permanente ran test after test. Blood work, x-rays, genetic screenings. Each appointment cost us a $25 copay that we carefully budgeted for, writing it down in the little notebook I kept for tracking expenses. David would hold Emma during the blood draws, singing Itsy Bitsy Spider while she screamed. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday. I remember because I'd made David's favorite dinner the night before, pot roast with carrots and potatoes, something hearty to celebrate what we thought would be good news. Dr. Martinez called it juvenile dermatomyositis, a rare autoimmune condition that causes muscle weakness and skin rashes. 1 in a million kids get it, she said. Lucky us. The treatment plan was overwhelming. Immunosuppressive drugs that cost $1,200 a month even with insurance. Physical therapy twice a week at 60 per session. Regular blood work to monitor the medication's effects on her liver. Dermatologist appointments for the distinctive rash that bloomed across her knuckles and eyelids like angry flowers. David was incredible at first. He researched everything, joined online support groups, printed out medical journal articles, made spreadsheets tracking Emma's symptoms and medications. When I was too exhausted to fight with insurance companies over prior authorizations, he'd spend his lunch breaks on the phone, arguing with representatives in carefully controlled tones. "This is my daughter's life we're talking about," I heard him say once, his voice tight with the effort of staying professional. "She needs this medication to walk." For 2 years we managed. It wasn't easy. Our savings account slowly drained, we ate a lot of pasta and generic cereal, and I picked up weekend bookkeeping jobs to help cover the medical bills. But we were handling it. Emma was responding well to treatment. She could run again, climb the monkey bars at Peninsula Park, ride the little carousel at the zoo, I should have noticed when David started changing. The subtle shifts in someone you love are easy to miss when you're focused on your child's medical charts and prescription refill dates. He stopped asking about Emma's doctor appointments, stopped helping with her bedtime routine, started working late more often. Johnson's breathing down my neck about the Henderson audit, he'd say, coming home at 9 o'clock with takeout Thai food. You know how it is. Except I didn't know how it was because I was home every evening, giving Emma her medications, reading her the same 3 books she'd memorized, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy in our increasingly abnormal life. The first time I found a receipt that didn't make sense, dinner for 2 at Le Pigeon, a restaurant we'd never been to because a single entree cost more than we spent on groceries in a week. I told myself it was a work dinner. David was ambitious. He wanted to make partner someday. These things were probably necessary. But then there were more receipts, a charge at Victoria's Secret for $89. I hadn't bought anything there in years. Hotel stays in downtown Portland when David claimed he was working late at the office. Gas charges in Beaverton, on the opposite side of town from his work. I confronted him on a Sunday morning in March. Emma was napping, and I'd been organizing our tax documents when I found all the evidence spread across our kitchen table like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that made a picture I didn't want to see. "What is this?" I asked, holding up the hotel receipt. David barely looked up from his laptop. "Work stuff. The Henderson team needed a place to brainstorm without office distractions. At the Heathman? David, this is a $300 a night hotel. The company's paying for it. Then why is it on our personal credit card?" That's when he finally looked at me. Really looked at me. And I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Cold calculation. Like he was deciding how much truth to give me. "I'm handling it, Sarah. Don't worry about it." Don't worry about it. As if I was some hysterical housewife instead of his partner. The woman who'd been managing our family's medical crisis while he worked his way up the corporate ladder. The truth came out 3 weeks later, not from David, but from Emma's preschool teacher, Miss Rodriguez. She pulled me aside during pickup, her face carefully neutral in that way, teachers perfect when they need to deliver bad news. "I don't want to overstep," she said, glancing around to make sure other parents couldn't hear. "But I saw your husband at Starbucks yesterday morning with a young woman. They seemed close." I thanked her and drove home in a daze, Emma chattering in her car seat about the butterfly garden they'd made in art class. That evening, I went through David's phone while he showered. Her name was Brittany. She was 24, worked as a paralegal at a firm 2 blocks from David's office, and based on their text messages, they'd been seeing each other for 4 months. 4 months of, "Can't wait to see you tonight," and "What are you wearing?" and "My wife doesn't understand me." My wife doesn't understand me. As if I hadn't spent every day for the past 3 years understanding exactly what he needed. Coffee with extra cream before big client meetings, his lucky tie for presentations, space to decompress after difficult days. As if I hadn't understood when he needed to talk and when he needed silence, when he needed encouragement and when he needed distraction. But I hadn't understood that he needed a 24-year-old with no responsibilities and no sick children to make him feel young again. I confronted him that night after Emma was asleep. Laid his phone on the kitchen table between us with the text thread open. "How long?" I asked. David stared at the phone for a long moment, then looked up at me with something that might have been relief. "Since Christmas. 4 months. 4 months of lying to my face while I worried about whether we could afford Emma's increased medication dosage. 4 months of letting me believe we were a team while he planned his exit strategy. Do you love her? I don't know. Maybe. It's complicated. It's complicated. The universal excuse of people who want to have their cake and eat it too. What about Emma? What about us? Sarah, look around." He gestured at our living room. The couch with the stain from when Emma had thrown up during a medication reaction, the coffee table covered with medical journals and insurance paperwork, the toy box overflowing with sensory toys recommended by her occupational therapist. This isn't a life. This is just existing. Emma's always going to be sick. This is never going to get easier. She's getting better. Dr. Martinez said. Dr. Martinez has been saying that for 2 years. How much money have we spent? How much more are we going to spend? I can't do this anymore. I stared at him, this man I'd loved since I was 20 years old. and realized I was looking at a stranger. So you want a divorce? I think it would be best for everyone. Best for everyone. As if abandoning his sick daughter and the woman who'd stood by him through everything was somehow a noble sacrifice. The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. David had been planning this longer than I'd realized. He'd already consulted with a lawyer, opened a separate bank account, even found an apartment in the Pearl District. A trendy place with exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of space we'd looked at when we were first married but couldn't afford. He could afford it now because he wouldn't be paying for Emma's medications anymore. Oregon's divorce laws are straightforward when there's a child involved. I would get primary custody. David didn't fight me on that, which should have been my first clue about what was coming. He'd have visitation every other weekend and Wednesday evenings. Child support would be calculated based on his income and the parenting time split. What the lawyers didn't account for was David's sudden career change. 2 weeks before the divorce was finalized, he quit Morrison Associates and took a job as a junior consultant at a startup in Southeast Portland. His salary dropped from $78,000 to $45,000 overnight. It's a growth opportunity, he told the mediator. The company has huge potential. I'm taking a temporary pay cut for long-term gains. Temporary, right? Just long enough to minimize his child support obligations. The final decree awarded me $673 per month in child support. $673 to help cover rent, food, utilities, and Emma's medical expenses that ran close to $2,000 monthly, even with insurance. I should have fought harder. Should have hired a better lawyer, demanded documentation of David's new job, challenged the obvious manipulation of his income. But I was exhausted, emotionally drained, and honestly, I just wanted it to be over. I wanted to start rebuilding our life without him. That was my first mistake. My second mistake was believing he'd actually pay the support regularly. David moved out on a Saturday in June. I remember because Emma had a soccer game that morning. Her first since starting her new medication regimen. She was so excited to show Daddy her improved coordination, her ability to run without falling. He didn't show up. "Where's Daddy?" she asked, scanning the sidelines while adjusting her shin guards. "He had to work, sweetheart. But I'm here, and I brought the good snacks." I held up the bag of orange slices and string cheese, trying to sound cheerful. Emma scored her first goal that day. She turned to the sidelines afterward, beaming, looking for the approval that had always been waiting for her. When she saw only me cheering, her little face crumpled for just a second before she pasted on a brave smile. That evening, David came for his boxes while Emma napped. We moved around each other in careful silence, him packing his books and clothes, me making dinner in the kitchen. The domesticity of it felt surreal, like we were performing the motions of a normal Saturday while our entire life fell apart. "I'll pick her up next Friday for my first weekend," he said, loading the last box into his Honda Civic. "Don't forget her medications. The schedule is on the fridge, and Dr. Martinez wants you to call if she has any reactions to the new—" "I know, Sarah. I'm still her father." But he wasn't really. Not in the ways that mattered. The first missed visit came 3 weeks later. Emma had been ready since lunch, her little overnight bag packed with favorite stuffed animals and the special pajamas she wore at Daddy's house. By 6 o'clock, she was sitting by the front window, watching for his car. "Maybe he's stuck in traffic," I said, though David was never late. Punctuality had been one of his most reliable traits. At 7, I called, straight to voicemail. At 8, Emma finally asked if she could unpack her bag and watch a movie instead. "Daddy's probably just really busy with work," I told her, hating myself for making excuses for him. "He'll call tomorrow." He didn't call tomorrow, or the day after that. When he finally answered his phone on Tuesday, his voice was distracted like I was interrupting something more important. "Sorry about Friday. Something came up at work. This new job, you know how it is. Rain check?" Rain check, as if his daughter's disappointment was a casual inconvenience that could be rescheduled. "Emma was really looking forward to seeing you. I'll make it up to her. Maybe we can do something fun next time." Next time came and went, and the time after that. The child support payments were equally erratic. The first month he paid the full amount on time. The second month, he was 2 weeks late and $200 short. By the fourth month, I was getting creative explanations. The startup was having cash flow problems. His paycheck had been delayed. There was an issue with his bank's automatic transfer system. I started keeping a detailed record in a composition notebook. Dates, amounts, excuses. Evidence for the inevitable court hearing where I'd have to prove that the man who'd once sung lullabies to our daughter was now treating her like an optional expense. The eviction notice came on a Tuesday in October. Bright orange paper taped to our front door like a beacon of failure. I'd been juggling bills for months, paying the rent late with apology notes to our landlord, Mr. Patel. He'd been patient, probably because Emma always waved to him from our window, and he'd grown fond of her. But patience only stretches so far when someone owes you 3 months' back rent. "Mrs. Henderson, I am so sorry," he said when I called him that evening, Emma coloring at the kitchen table behind me. "My wife. She says I am too soft-hearted, but I have daughter too. But mortgage company, they do not care about soft hearts." I understood. Of course I understood. Mr. Patel was a good man caught in an impossible situation just like me. We had 30 days. I'd been looking for a new job since the divorce was finalized, but Portland's market was tough, especially for someone whose resume had a gap from taking care of a sick child. The interview I'd had the week before at a nonprofit downtown had gone well, but they wouldn't make a decision until November. Too late. That night, after Emma was asleep, I sat at our kitchen table with a legal pad and calculated our options. My savings account had $247. My checking account had $89. Emma's medication refill was due in 6 days and would cost $156 after insurance. I could ask my mother for help, but she was barely making ends meet herself on Social Security. My sister lived in Phoenix and had 3 kids of her own. David's parents had made their feelings clear when he'd announced the divorce. They supported their son's decision to start fresh, and apparently that meant cutting ties with their granddaughter too. I'd never felt more alone in my life. The next morning, I called David. It took 4 tries before he answered, and when he did, I could hear a woman's voice in the background, young, laughing at something on television. "I need help," I said, without preamble. "We're being evicted." Silence on the other end. Then, "That's not my problem anymore, Sarah. It's your daughter's problem. She needs a place to live." Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to keep the expensive apartment instead of downsizing. Expensive apartment. Our 2-bedroom rental that cost $1,400 a month, hardly luxury housing by Portland standards, but apparently too extravagant for a woman whose child needed her own room for medical equipment and privacy for changing medication patches. "David, please, I'm not asking for much. Just help me with first month's rent somewhere cheaper, or maybe, I'm not your bank, Sarah. Figure it out." He hung up. I stared at the phone for a long time, listening to the dial tone, feeling something fundamental shift inside me. The last fragile thread of hope that David might remember who he used to be, the man who'd held our daughter through those first terrifying medical appointments, finally snapped. Fine, I'd figure it out myself. Finding an apartment with an eviction on your credit report and a sick child is like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. Most landlords took one look at my application and politely declined. The ones who didn't decline outright wanted deposits I couldn't afford. First month, last month. Security deposit, pet deposit, even though we didn't have pets. I spent my days driving around southeast Portland, calling numbers on for rent signs. Each rejection another weight on my chest. Emma came with me sometimes when I couldn't find a babysitter, patiently coloring in her car seat while I talked to skeptical property managers. "Mama, why are we looking at so many houses?" she asked one afternoon as we sat in the car outside another apartment complex that had just turned us down. "We're going on an adventure, remember? Finding a new place to call home? Will it have a room for my medical stuff?" My heart clenched. At 5 years old, she already understood that her needs made everything more complicated. "Yes, baby, it'll have everything you need." I was lying, but what else could I say? Our salvation came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Chen, whose bakery we'd lived above for those first happy years of our marriage, called me one evening while Emma was doing her physical therapy exercises on the living room floor. "Sarah, my dear," she said in her careful English, "I hear from Mr. Patel you're looking for a new place?" I'd been buying bread from her shop once a week since we'd moved to our current apartment, partly for the comfort of her familiar smile, partly because Emma loved the chocolate croissants that were our one weekly indulgence. My nephew. He has small house in J District. Tenant move out last week. Is not fancy, but is clean, safe, good neighborhood for little girl. The house was a tiny 1920s bungalow on Southeast Division, wedged between a Vietnamese restaurant and a laundromat. 800 square feet, 1 bathroom, 2 bedrooms barely larger than closets. But it was within walking distance of Emma's school. The rent was $950, still more than I could comfortably afford, but manageable. And Mrs. Chen's nephew Tommy didn't seem concerned about my credit score. Kid needs stable place, he said simply when I explained our situation. I got kids too. Sometimes life kicks you in the teeth, you know. I knew. The deposit was $500, which wiped out my remaining savings and required pawning my wedding ring, the simple solitaire from K Jewelers that had once represented everything I believed about love and commitment. The pawn shop clerk offered me $150 for it. I negotiated him up to $200 and tried not to think about the symbolism. We moved in on Halloween, carrying our boxes up the front steps while neighborhood kids ran past in costume. Emma was a butterfly that year, a costume I'd made from old sheets and wire hangers because we couldn't afford store-bought. She helped me unpack her bedroom, arranging her stuffed animals on the narrow shelf Tommy had installed. I like it here, she announced, spinning in the middle of her new room. It feels cozy. Cozy. Such a generous word for cramped and outdated. But she was right. It did feel cozy. More importantly, it felt safe. And it was ours. That night, after Emma was asleep in her new bedroom, I sat on our secondhand couch purchased from Goodwill for $75 and made a list in my composition notebook. Not bills or medical appointments, but goals. Find a better job. Rebuild our emergency fund. Create a stable life for Emma. Get strong enough that we'd never have to depend on anyone else again. The job at Northwest Family Services started 2 weeks later. It wasn't the non-profit position I'd interviewed for that had gone to someone with more recent experience, but a referral from Emma's social worker at the hospital. They needed someone to manage billing and insurance claims for their pediatric counseling program. The pay was $32,000 a year, barely more than minimum wage, but it came with health benefits and flexible scheduling for Emma's medical appointments. My supervisor, Janet, was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd been working with troubled families for 20 years. She took one look at my resume and circumstances and made her expectations clear. "I don't care about your personal drama," she said on my first day, showing me to a desk in a converted closet that served as the billing office. "But I do care that these kids get the services they need, and that means keeping our insurance relationships clean. Can you handle that?" I could handle that. The work was challenging in ways I hadn't expected. Medical billing is complex under the best circumstances, but dealing with insurance companies who seemed determined to deny coverage for children's mental health services was like fighting a Hydra solve one problem and 2 more sprouted in its place. But I was good at it. All those years of managing Emma's medical care had taught me how to navigate the system, how to speak the language of prior authorizations and diagnostic codes. I learned to be persistent without being aggressive, professional without being pushover. Sarah got Medicaid to cover Tommy Rodriguez's play therapy, Janet announced at a staff meeting 3 months after I started. 16 sessions they initially denied. Kid's been waiting for help since his dad deployed to Afghanistan. It felt good to use my skills to help other families navigate the maze I knew so well. And slowly, very slowly, our own situation began to stabilize. Emma thrived in our new neighborhood. The diversity of J District meant she wasn't the only child dealing with medical challenges. Her new best friend Lily had severe asthma, and their shared understanding of nebulizer treatments and emergency action plans created an instant bond. The Vietnamese restaurant next door, Pho Saigon, became our Friday night tradition. $10 could buy us a feast of pho and spring rolls, and the owner's daughter, also 8, often joined Emma for homework sessions at our favorite corner table. I enrolled in evening bookkeeping classes at Portland Community College, using financial aid and determination to work toward my CPA certification. 2 nights a week, Emma would do homework at the kitchen table while I studied at the other end, both of us building towards something better. David, meanwhile, became an increasingly distant figure. His visitation schedule dwindled to maybe once a month, usually last-minute invitations when Brittany was busy, or he felt guilty enough to remember he had a daughter. Child support payments came sporadically, and when they did, they were often partial amounts accompanied by explanations about startup struggles and temporary cash flow problems. I stopped expecting anything from him and started building a life that didn't need his contributions to function. The turning point came 18 months after our divorce was final. Emma had been invited to a birthday party at one of those indoor playground places. Pump it up and the $25 entry fee might as well have been $250 given our budget. But she'd been looking forward to it for weeks, and I was determined not to let her miss out because of money. I picked up extra weekend work doing books for a small restaurant in Hawthorne, hunched over receipts and invoices in their back office while Emma played with the owner's kids. By the time I'd earned enough for the party fee plus a small gift, I was exhausted but proud. At the party, I watched Emma navigate the obstacle courses and bounce houses with careful precision. Her muscle strength had improved dramatically over the past year. Dr. Martinez was talking about reducing her medication dosage, but she was still more cautious than other kids, more aware of her body's limitations. "She's doing so well," said another mother, watching Emma help a younger child up a climbing wall. "You should be proud." I was proud, fiercely, overwhelmingly proud of this little girl who'd faced more medical challenges in her 8 years than most adults face in a lifetime, who'd watched her father disappear from her life with grace beyond her years, who still woke up every morning ready to tackle whatever the day brought. "She's amazing," I agreed, and meant it completely. That night, as I was tucking her in, Emma looked up at me with David's brown eyes and my stubborn chin. "Mama, are you sad that Daddy doesn't come around much anymore?" I chose honesty over comforting lies. Sometimes I'm sad about it, but not the way you might think. I'm sad for him, because he's missing out on watching you grow into such an incredible person. "I'm not sad," she said matter-of-factly. "We're doing fine without him, aren't we?" We were. We absolutely were. The breakthrough came during my 3rd year at Northwest Family Services. I'd been promoted twice, first to senior billing specialist, then to office manager, and my salary had increased to $42,000. Not wealthy by any means, but combined with my evening bookkeeping clients, we were finally comfortable. More importantly, I discovered I had a talent for something I'd never expected: advocacy. The insurance companies had stopped trying to intimidate me. I knew their tricks, their delay tactics, their automatic denial strategies. When Blue Cross rejected coverage for a 12-year-old's eating disorder treatment, I didn't just file an appeal. I researched the reviewer's credentials, cited specific policy language, and copied the state insurance commissioner on my response. The coverage was approved within a week. Word got around. Other small nonprofits started calling, asking if I could help them with particularly difficult cases. I began consulting part-time, helping organizations navigate complex billing situations and insurance appeals. "You should start your own business," suggested Dr. Sarah Kim, a child psychologist who'd become a friend through our work together. "There's a real need for someone with your skills. Most of these small practices are drowning in paperwork." The idea terrified me. Starting a business meant risk, meant potentially losing the steady paycheck that had finally given us security. But Emma was doing well. Her latest blood work showed her condition was in stable remission, and we'd been able to reduce her medications to just a maintenance dose. For the first time in years, I could think beyond just surviving to the next month. I started small, taking on 1 or 2 consulting clients while keeping my day job. Working from our kitchen table after Emma went to bed, I helped a family therapy practice recover $30,000 in wrongfully denied claims. A pediatric occupational therapy clinic hired me to streamline their billing processes, increasing their collections by 40 in 6 months. The work was satisfying in ways I hadn't expected. Every successfully appealed claim meant a child getting needed treatment, a family not going into debt for their child's mental health care. I was using my hard-won expertise to make the system work for people like us. Parents who were fighting for their kids against bureaucratic obstacles and insurance company indifference. By Emma's 9th birthday, I'd saved enough to rent a small office space in Southeast Portland and hire a part-time assistant. Healthcare Advocacy Solutions was officially launched, specializing in insurance appeals and billing optimization for pediatric mental health providers. Emma helped me paint the office walls pale yellow. "It's a happy color," she declared, and arranged the waiting area chairs I'd bought at an estate sale. On opening day, she presented me with a hand-drawn sign. My mom helps families. She's really good at it. I hung it on the wall behind my desk, where it still hangs today. The call came on a Tuesday evening in March, exactly 5 years after David had moved out of our life. Emma was at the kitchen table working on a science project about genetics ironic, given her own genetic lottery ticket when my phone rang. "Sarah, it's David." I hadn't heard his voice in over a year. Our communication had dwindled to sporadic text messages about missed child support payments and canceled visitation plans. Emma had stopped asking when Daddy was coming to visit. I'd stopped expecting the payments to arrive on time. "What do you need?" I asked, walking into the living room where Emma couldn't overhear. "I wanted to talk to you. About Emma. About things. Could we meet somewhere? Coffee?" The request was so unexpected I almost laughed. "Why?" A long pause. "Please, Sarah. It's important." Something in his voice, not the confident tone I remembered, but something smaller, more uncertain, made me agree. We arranged to meet at a neutral cafe in the Pearl District, close to his apartment. I hired Mrs. Chen's granddaughter to watch Emma the next evening, telling her only that I had a business meeting. It wasn't entirely a lie. David was already seated at a corner table when I arrived, looking older than his 38 years. His hair was thinning at the crown, and he'd gained weight around his middle. More striking was his expression. The easy confidence that had defined him throughout our marriage was gone, replaced by something that looked like defeat. "You look good," he said as I sat down. "Really good." I was wearing one of my business suits, a navy blue ensemble from Ann Taylor that I'd bought when I could finally afford professional clothes again. My hair was shorter now, styled in a bob that was practical and polished. I'd learned to carry myself differently over the past 5 years, with the confidence that comes from knowing you can handle whatever life throws at you. "How's Emma?" "She's wonderful. Her condition is stable. She's doing well in school. She has friends. She's turning into quite the little scientist." That's great. I'm glad." We sat in awkward silence while I waited for him to explain why we were here. Whatever this was about, it wasn't casual concern for his daughter's welfare. "Brittany and I broke up," he said finally, 3 months ago." "Ah, there it was." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, though I wasn't. "She was. It wasn't what I thought it would be. She was so young, you know. She didn't understand about responsibility, about building something together. Everything was just fun and excitement for her. When things got difficult, when the startup failed and I had to take a regular job again, she wasn't interested in sticking around. The startup failed. That explained the irregular child support payments over the past year. She was pregnant," he continued, staring into his coffee cup. "Last fall. We were talking about getting married, starting a family. But when she miscarried, she blamed me. Said the stress of my financial problems caused it. Maybe she was right. I felt a stab of something, not sympathy, exactly, but recognition. I knew what it felt like to lose a pregnancy, to wonder if stress and circumstances had contributed to the loss. David and I had lost a baby between Emma and the divorce, an early miscarriage that we'd grieved together but rarely talked about. "David, why are you telling me this?" "Because I've been thinking a lot lately, about choices I made, about what I gave up." He looked up at me finally, and I saw something I'd never expected to see in his eyes. Regret. "I saw you last month, you know, at Emma's school. You were talking to her teacher and she was laughing about something and you both looked so happy, content." I remembered that day. Parent-teacher conferences where Mrs. Patterson had praised Emma's compassion and problem-solving skills. "She's the kind of student who makes teaching worthwhile," she'd said. Emma had been glowing with pride. "We are happy," I said simply. "I made a mistake, Sarah. The biggest mistake of my life." There it was. The conversation I'd imagined having 1,000 times during those first raw months after he left, when I'd fantasized about him realizing what he'd lost and begging for forgiveness. Now that it was actually happening, I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication. Just a kind of tired sadness for the man across from me who destroyed his own family for something that turned out to be an illusion. What do you want, David? I want to try again. I want to be part of Emma's life, really part of it. And I want to see if maybe we could. If there's any chance for us. The request was so absurd I did laugh then, a short bark of surprise. You want to get back together? I know it sounds crazy, but we were good together once. We built something real. And Emma needs her father. Emma has managed perfectly well without her father for 5 years. She's learned not to count on you for anything, which was probably the healthiest thing that could have happened to her. David flinched. I know I screwed up. I know I haven't been the father she deserved. But people change. I've changed. Have you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're here because your backup plan didn't work out. Brittany left you. Your get-rich-quick scheme failed, and now you want to come crawling back to the stability you threw away. That's not... Did you bring a cashier's check for the $8,000 in back child support you owe? Because if you want to talk about being part of Emma's life, that would be a good place to start. He looked away. I'm having some cash flow issues right now. Of course he was. I finished my coffee and stood up. I need to get home. Emma's working on a project for the science fair. Sarah, wait, please, just think about it. Think about what we could have again. I turned back to look at him one last time. David, I have thought about it. Every day for 5 years, I've thought about the life we had and the life we lost. But here's what I've learned. I don't want that life back. I don't want the woman I was when I was married to you, scared, dependent, making excuses for someone else's failures. I've built something better. But Emma has learned that she can count on herself and the people who actually show up for her. She's learned that love isn't about grand gestures or promises. It's about consistent action. It's about being present for the small moments and the difficult ones. You taught her that lesson by your absence, and ironically, it might be the most valuable thing you ever gave her. I gathered my purse and car keys. If you want to be part of Emma's life, you know how to reach me. But understand this, it's on her terms now, not yours. She's not a little girl desperate for daddy's attention anymore. She's a confident, strong kid who knows her own worth. If you disappoint her again, it won't break her heart. It'll just confirm what she already knows about your character. I left him sitting there, staring into his empty coffee cup, and drove home to my daughter and the life we'd built without him. Emma was at the kitchen table when I got home, surrounded by poster board and colored markers, working on her genetics project with the focused intensity she brought to everything that mattered to her. How was your meeting? She asked without looking up from her careful lettering. Productive, I said, which was true in its way. What are you working on? The section about genetic mutations. Did you know that sometimes what looks like a disadvantage can actually make you stronger? Like people with sickle cell trait are more resistant to malaria. I sat down next to her, admiring her neat handwriting and careful research. At 9 years old, she understood concepts about genetics and adaptation that many adults never grasped. Her own genetic quirk, the autoimmune condition that had shaped so much of our early struggle, had taught her resilience and empathy that would serve her for life. That's very insightful, I said. Sometimes the things that challenge us most end up being our greatest strengths. She looked up at me then, with those brown eyes that were so like David's but held a wisdom he'd never possessed. Is that what happened to us? When Daddy left, and we had to figure everything out ourselves? Smart girl. Too smart sometimes. What do you think? I think maybe it was. Because we're pretty strong now, aren't we? We are incredibly strong. She went back to her project, adding careful details about genetic diversity and survival advantages. I watched her work. This remarkable person who'd emerged from the worst period of our lives with grace and determination intact. My phone buzzed with a text message. David, of course. Thank you for meeting me. I know I have a lot to make up for. Can I take Emma to dinner this weekend? I promise I'll be reliable this time. I showed the message to Emma. What do you think? She considered it seriously, the way she considered everything. Can I choose the restaurant? Of course. And if he cancels, we'll go anyway? Just us? Absolutely. Okay then, but I want to go somewhere with good dessert. Life's too short for bad dessert. I laughed, recognizing my own philosophy reflected back at me. Life was too short for a lot of things. Bad dessert, unreliable people, settling for less than you deserved. She went back to her genetics project, and I went to my laptop to check emails from clients. 3 new inquiries, including one from a large pediatric practice in Seattle that had heard about our success with complex insurance appeals. The business was thriving, growing beyond what I'd dared to imagine when I'd first hung Emma's hand-drawn sign in my tiny office. The dinner with David happened, actually. Emma chose a Vietnamese restaurant in Jade District, her old Friday night place, and David showed up on time, bearing a science kit he'd clearly bought that afternoon at Target. They had a pleasant meal, talked about her school projects, and his new job at an accounting firm downtown. He was trying, in his way. But when he dropped her off afterward, Emma's assessment was characteristically direct. "He's nice," she told me as we got ready for bed. "But he feels like a stranger who's trying really hard to be my dad. It's kind of sad." David continued his efforts over the following months. Regular visits, usually monthly. Birthday presents that were thoughtful if generic. Child support payments that came closer to on time, though still not the full amount owed. Emma was gracious with him, the way she'd learned to be gracious with everyone. Polite, friendly, but guarded. She'd share surface details about school and friends, but not the deeper currents of her life. She didn't tell him about the nightmares she'd had when her disease first went into remission, fears that it would come back stronger. She didn't share her dreams of becoming a doctor herself someday, specializing in autoimmune disorders in children. She didn't mention the boy in her class she had a crush on, or her worries about starting middle school next year. Those conversations were reserved for people who'd earned the right to them through consistent presence and unconditional support. The full circle moment came 2 years later, at Emma's 6th grade graduation. She'd been selected to give the student speech, an honor that had her both thrilled and terrified for weeks beforehand. I arrived early to get a good seat, wearing the new dress I'd bought to celebrate my company's biggest contract yet, a partnership with the state health department to help streamline pediatric mental health services statewide. The business now employed 4 full-time staff and had a waiting list of potential clients. David showed up just as the ceremony was starting, scanning the crowded gymnasium for available seats. I caught his eye and pointed to the empty chair I'd been saving. Old habits of courtesy die hard, I suppose. "Thank you," he said as he settled in beside me. Traffic was murder. I nodded, my attention focused on the stage where Emma sat with her classmates, looking poised and confident in her cap and gown. She'd grown into a beautiful child. Not just physically, though she was that too, but beautiful in the way that comes from inner strength and genuine kindness. When her turn came to speak, she walked to the podium with the same careful precision I'd watched her navigate those playground obstacles with years earlier. But now it came from confidence rather than caution. "My fellow students, families, and teachers," she began, her voice clear and strong. "I want to talk about something I've learned over the past few years, the difference between surviving and thriving. When I was little, I got sick, really sick, with a disease that made my muscles weak and my skin break out in rashes. For a while, my family's whole life was about managing my illness, doctor appointments, medications, therapy sessions. We were surviving, but we weren't really living. Then some things in my life changed. Big things that seemed scary at first. My mom and I had to learn how to take care of ourselves in new ways. We had to be braver and stronger than we thought we could be. And you know what we discovered? We weren't just surviving anymore. We were thriving. I learned that thriving doesn't mean your life is perfect or easy. It means you figured out how to be happy and successful despite the challenges you face. It means you've built a life that feels authentic to who you are, not who someone else thinks you should be. As we move on to middle school, we're all going to face new challenges. Some of you might move to different schools, or deal with friend drama, or struggle with harder classes. But I want you to remember that you have everything inside you already to not just survive those challenges, but to thrive because of them. The strongest people I know aren't the ones who never face difficulties. They're the ones who face difficulties and use them to become more compassionate, more resilient, and more true to themselves. She paused, her eyes finding mine in the audience, and smiled. My mom always tells me that we don't get to choose what happens to us, but we get to choose what we do with what happens to us. So as we graduate today, let's choose to be people who thrive. Let's choose to build lives that make us proud, to be friends who show up for each other, and to remember that our challenges don't define us. Our responses to them do. Thank you. The applause was thunderous. I was crying. Happy tears. Proud tears. Amazed tears that this extraordinary young woman was my daughter. Around me, other parents were wiping their eyes too, moved by the wisdom and maturity in her words. David was staring at the stage with an expression I couldn't quite read. When Emma returned to her seat, beaming at the response to her speech, he leaned over to me. "She's incredible," he whispered. "You've raised an incredible human being." "We did that together," I said quietly. She did most of the work herself. After the ceremony, there was the usual chaos of photos and congratulations. Emma was surrounded by classmates and teachers, glowing with the success of her speech and the excitement of graduation. I watched her navigate the social dynamics with ease, including everyone in conversations, making sure the quieter kids felt included. David approached her with a bouquet of flowers daisies, her favorite. "That was an amazing speech, kiddo. I'm really proud of you." "Thanks, Dad." She hugged him briefly, accepting the flowers with genuine pleasure. "Did you know Mom helped me practice it like 50 times? She made me time it and everything." "Your mom's good at helping people succeed," he said, glancing at me. "She always was." Emma nodded seriously. "She's the best at it. Did you know her company just got a huge contract with the state? She's going to help thousands of kids get the medical care they need." I could see David processing this information, the successful business, the state contract, the confident woman his ex-wife had become. It was clear he'd been thinking of me as I was during our marriage, dependent, struggling, defined by our circumstances rather than rising above them. "That's wonderful," he said, and seemed to mean it. Really wonderful. Later that evening, after the celebration dinner at Emma's favorite restaurant, Thai food this time, her tastes had evolved. After the phone calls to grandparents and friends sharing the good news, after Emma had fallen asleep surrounded by flowers and graduation gifts, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea and reflected on how far we'd come. The house was quiet, filled with the accumulated treasures of a life rebuilt from scratch. Emma's science fair ribbons on the refrigerator, my business awards on the bookshelf, photos from school events, birthday parties, vacations we'd finally been able to afford. The detritus of a life fully lived, not just survived. My phone rang. David, of course. "I wanted to thank you again for saving me a seat tonight, and for raising Emma to be so gracious with me, even though I know I don't deserve it." "She's gracious because that's who she is, not because I taught her to be, though I'm glad she chooses kindness. Sarah, I need you to know something. I've been going to therapy since Brittany and I broke up, trying to understand why I made the choices I did, why I was willing to throw away everything good in my life." I waited, not sure where this was going. "I was scared," he continued. "When Emma got sick, when the medical bills started piling up, when our whole life became about managing her condition, I was terrified. Not just of the financial burden, but of failing as a father, of not being strong enough to handle it. So you decided not to handle it at all. So I decided to run away, yeah. I told myself I was being practical, that you were better at dealing with medical stuff, that Emma would be fine with just you. But really, I was just a coward who couldn't face the possibility that I might not be enough." I sipped my tea, considering his words. There was truth in them, even if it was truth that came 5 years too late. "The irony is," he went on, "by trying to avoid failing her, I failed her completely. And I failed you too. You needed a partner, and I abandoned you when you needed me most." "Yes," I said simply. "You did. I can't undo that. But I want you to know that watching Emma tonight, seeing the person she's become, seeing what you've accomplished, it's made me realize that you didn't just survive what I put you through. You thrived because of your own strength, not despite my absence. It was the closest thing to a real apology I'd ever gotten from him. I'm glad you're in therapy, David. I think it will help you be a better father to Emma going forward. Do you think... Is there any chance we could ever be friends? Real friends, I mean. Co-parents who actually support each other?" I thought about it seriously. Emma was getting older, would be dealing with the complexities of adolescence soon. Having parents who could communicate effectively, who didn't carry the poison of old resentments, would be better for her. I think that's possible, I said finally. But it would have to be earned, David. Through actions, not words. Through showing up consistently, not just when it's convenient. I understand. And Sarah, I want you to know that I'm genuinely happy about your success. You deserved better than what I gave you, and I'm glad you found a way to create it for yourself. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet for a while longer, thinking about forgiveness and moving forward. I wasn't ready to forgive David completely. Some betrayals leave permanent scars. But I was ready to stop carrying the anger that had sustained me through the hardest years. It had served its purpose, giving me the fuel I needed to rebuild our life. Now it was just extra weight. Emma appeared in the doorway, hair messy from sleep, clutching her favorite stuffed animal. "Can't sleep?" I asked, patting the couch beside me. She curled up next to me, warm and solid and wonderfully real. "I keep thinking about my speech," she said. "Do you think it was okay? I mean, really okay?" "I think it was perfect. I think you said exactly what needed to be said." "Good, because I meant all of it. About thriving instead of just surviving." "I know you did." We sat together in comfortable silence, watching the lights of Portland twinkle through our front window. This house that had seemed so small and inadequate when we'd first moved in now felt exactly right. Cozy, safe, filled with the kind of love that comes from weathering storms together. "Mom? Yes, sweetheart. I'm proud of us. For everything we've built." "Me too, baby. Me too." And sitting there with my remarkable daughter, surrounded by the life we'd created from the ashes of the old one, I realized that David had been right about one thing. We had thrived. Not because the challenges had made us stronger in some simple, inspirational way, but because we'd learned that we were already strong enough to handle whatever came our way. The girl, who'd been thrown out with her sick child 5 years ago, was gone. In her place sat a successful businesswoman, a devoted mother, and a woman who knew her own worth. I'd stopped waiting for someone else to save me and learned to save myself. And Emma, this incredible person beside me, had learned the most important lesson of all. That love isn't about being perfect or never facing difficulties. It's about showing up, staying present, and choosing each other again and again, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. We'd built something beautiful from the wreckage David had left behind. And whether he understood it or not, whether he ever became the father Emma deserved or remained a peripheral figure in our lives, it didn't matter anymore. We were enough, just as we were. We were home. Epilogue. 5 years later, Emma started her freshman year at Oregon Health Science University, pre-med with a focus on rheumatology. Her disease remained in stable remission, managed with minimal medication and regular checkups that had become routine, rather than crisis management. David attended her high school graduation, along with his new girlfriend, a woman his own age, a nurse practitioner who seemed to understand that relationships required work and commitment. He'd been consistently present in Emma's life since that 6th grade graduation. Not perfect, but reliable. They'd built something that resembled a real father-daughter relationship based on who they both were now, rather than who they'd been during the crisis years. Healthcare Advocacy Solutions had grown into a statewide organization with 22 employees and contracts in 3 states. I'd been invited to testify before Congress about healthcare accessibility for families with chronic conditions, and my TED Talk about resilience had been viewed over 1 million times. But the achievement I was most proud of was much simpler. Emma and I still had our Friday night dinners together, even though she was in college now. Sometimes we went to fancy restaurants to celebrate her good grades or my latest business milestone. More often, we still ended up at Faux Saigon, sitting at our old corner table, talking about her classes, her dreams, her plans to change the world one patient at a time. The little girl who'd been dismissed as a burden, whose medical needs had been seen as too expensive and complicated to be worth the effort, was going to spend her life making sure no other child felt that way. As for me, I'd learned that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is also the best thing, because it forces you to discover strengths you never knew you had, and to build a life that's authentically yours rather than a compromise with someone else's limitations. I kept David's first text message from that night in the coffee shop, saved in my phone, not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder. Thank you for meeting me. I know I have a lot to make up for. He did have a lot to make up for. We all do, in our various ways. But the beautiful thing about life is that every day offers a new chance to be better, to show up more fully, to choose love over fear. Emma learned that lesson young, and it made all the difference. As for me, I learned it the hard way, which turned out to be the only way that really stuck. And sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet, and I'm working on a particularly challenging case, fighting for another family's right to necessary medical care, I think about that woman who sat at her kitchen table 5 years ago, calculating whether she had enough money for both rent and her daughter's medication. I wish I could tell her what I know now, that she was stronger than she realized, that the worst was almost over, and that the life waiting for her on the other side of all that pain was better than anything she could have imagined. But she had to walk through the fire to find it, just like all of us do. The only way out is through, and the only way to thrive is to refuse to settle for merely surviving. Emma taught me that. My brilliant, brave, beautiful daughter who turned out to be the greatest teacher I ever had.